Story 1. I got fired once for having emergency gallbladder surgery. We had a phone deposition with human resources and the unemployment judge. After they explained when I was fired, the judge asked them why they didn't offer me Family and Medical Leave Act. They said, he didn't ask. The judge said, it's your job to offer him Family and Medical Leave Act. You're lucky he didn't sue you. Unemployment approved. Story 2. I got fired for reporting the daycare I worked at to the state for blatant violations and providing photo evidence. That facility got shut down shortly after. Story 3. I took a coffee mug home from the office kitchen on a Friday. I got a call from Human Resources on Saturday asking me to come in for an emergency meeting and was fired on the spot. It turns out I was seen by security walking out with company property, the coffee mug from the office kitchen. Later, I was able to prove it was my personal mug and was offered my job back, but I declined to return. Story 4. I was working in electronics at Walmart. There was an actual rule that you could not check out family members, but the unspoken rule was that if you knew someone well enough to know their first name, you weren't allowed to check them through your line. I was working the day after Black Friday. I had a line going out the back of the department. I was the only cashier in electronics. A friend of my mother's was apparently in my line. I had already started scanning items when I looked up and realized it was someone I knew. She didn't even have any electronics. I went ahead and checked her through. A coworker reported to management that I had checked my mother through my line. They were both overweight, same age, similar haircuts, glasses. I understand the mistake, as I hadn't been working there very long. Even when I explained to management who it actually was, they said I should have stopped and called a manager to come cancel the transaction and walk her to the front of the store to be checked out by someone else. So because I checked someone I knew in passing through my line instead of waiting for a manager during the Black Saturday rush and holding up my line for as much as 10 to 15 minutes, I got fired on the spot. Story 5. While working in the produce section of a grocery store in Iowa, someone heard me talking about stocking cherries, which in their mind was stalking cherries, and the next thing I knew, the produce manager and I were outside, and he offered me a ride home because my parents were working. I walked home, and randomly, someone threw a McDonald's cheeseburger at me and hit me in the back of my leg. Weird day. Story 6. I'm pretty sure I was fired as a witness to spousal abuse. I was groundskeeping for a wealthy local business owner. Not so local really. I think the products are available nationwide in every box store. Anyhow, one day I was outside sweeping Buckeyes from the driveway when the husband came screeching into the driveway. He drove a Mercedes compressor sedan, stormed inside, started yelling and screaming, slamming doors and cabinets. There was a muffled argument, then silence, and a while later the wife came outside crying with a paycheck and told me I was being let go. It was a cash gig, so there wasn't any recourse, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Story 7. I got fired for quitting once. I worked in a shop that modified laptops. People wanted the latest Asus laptops, but with special thermal paste or a faster processor or whatever, so we would swap parts out and do whatever the customer asked and then put it all back together. This was an okay gig for me. It was not in my wheelhouse, but it was different from the jobs I had taken before, so I stuck with it for as long as I could. Until one day, there was a particularly tricky modification required for one laptop, tricky enough that 3 different people, including myself, ended up doing different things to the laptop. Typically, if there was some kind of modification needed that only the owner was comfortable doing, they were the only one to handle the whole computer, so for 3 people to work on one laptop was unusual. Somehow, in the confusion of passing the thing around the office, the Intel Core i9 processor went missing. Instantly, the blame fell entirely on me. I scoured my workstation and tore everything apart. The chip was not there. I tried to point out that 3 people had touched the thing, but the owner insisted they did not lose it, and the other guy had been working there too long to make that kind of mistake. A couple of days went by, and a friend of mine who worked there told me the higher-ups thought I stole the chip to resell it. They then told me that the owner is actually a reasonable person, and if I just went in and talked about how 3 people, including them, handled the machine, likely they would just split the cost of the missing processor 3 ways and consider it done. When I went back in, I overheard the boss and the other employee who modified the laptop talking about how they do not tolerate this kind of incompetence and something has to be done. I knocked on the office door and asked to talk about the situation. Even though the boss was already talking about me, he did not have time right then. I waited until lunch and tried his office again. He was again in his office, coincidentally discussing incompetence and theft in the office with the same employee who was nodding their head in agreement. The boss still did not have time to talk to me. When I left for lunch, I did not go back. I called my previous employer and asked for my job back. They were happy to have me. I stayed home, confident in my decision. A couple of hours later, I got a call from my former boss. They wanted to know why I was late. I told them I got my old job back and did not appreciate all this avoidance and accusation without even talking to me. Just about me. They said, "You realize what you just did, right? You walked out on a job. You're fired." They said it themselves, "You walked, so you're fired." Whatever, I said, "I will come get my last paycheck next Monday." I got my check without incident and resumed my previous gig as a taxi driver. The cost of the processor was not deducted from my check. Story 8. My hair. I'm a white woman with very curly, big, blonde, natural hair. I straightened it for the interview. On the first day of work, I showed up with my natural hair. I understand that this can be considered a bait and switch to some, but please remember that straightening my hair every day is very damaging. The owner and lawyer I was working with instantly grimaced at my hair and commented on it, telling me to get it under control. The next day, I put it in a bun and pinned it back. I showed up to work, and she gave a look of disgust at my hair and told me it was fine. Then, the next morning, I was fired. I can only ascertain the reason. Story 9. I worked in logistics. We were the overnight crew who basically took care of all the backorder issues and problems like, "Oops, where did the shipping label come from? Should I have already shipped that out?" Essentially, the day shift left all their unresolved issues for us, and it was our responsibility to figure it out. There were 3 other young women besides myself. Our boss was a young gentleman. Every weekend, they would go out drinking and partying together. I politely declined. After a couple of months of this, my boss approached me directly and tried to pressure me into joining them, attempting to belittle and degrade me for wanting to just go home after work. Long story short, I found out all 3 of the other women weren't just partying with him. They were involved with him, and he wanted me to do the same. I refused and left quickly. I did not yell at him or anything else. I was going to report him in the morning, but HR wasn't open at the time. I got a call at 8 a.m. that morning. Our shift tended to end between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., saying that my services were no longer needed and not to bother coming in anymore. Story 10. Was planning to go straight from work to camping on a Friday, so I had my truck all packed up. My boss saw my sealed bottle of whiskey in the front seat and fired me over it for having alcohol at work. He had a grudge for some reason. Story 11. Got fired for being a no-show, no-call. The manager lied and said I never contacted her and was shaking like a leaf. Went to the owner and said, "Here's my outgoing call to you the day before saying I had the fever and chills, etc." It was my phone record showing I called the manager's number and had a 90-second call. 2 weeks later, they confirmed that wasn't the only thing she was lying about, embezzlement, and they offered me my manager's job. I said only if they gave me her rate and benefits. They said they couldn't do that and I wouldn't budge. I drove back to the business, shook hands, and they were apologetic, but I hated that job anyway. Story 12. I was fired for not being available after hours as an hourly employee. I was never allowed to take my laptop home. During Ramadan, a client experienced an outage, and I was the only one in the area while the boss and family were out camping. I filed a case with the Department of Labor. Story 13. Not technically fired. I was an information technology contractor for a while. The client firm decided to make some contractors permanent. I was one of 2 on my team. Only one was going to get the job. The other would not have their contract renewed. I was the better engineer. He was the better socializer. He got the job. Edited to add. It's not like I was someone that no one liked. My colleague was a smoker, but I'm not. A number of long-time existing permanent staff were also smokers. So they all had more face time with each other and it was more casual. Also, I'm not nearly as bitter about this as it may sound. It was disappointing at the time and led to some rough times for a bit. But now I'm doing much better professionally than I probably would be if I were still there. Story 14. For going to work, I interviewed with the general manager of a restaurant, did the walk around, accepted the offer, and got the company apron. I showed up for my first day, and the assistant manager told me the general manager never let him know anything. They took my apron. The general manager called me to fire me at the end of my first week for no call, no show. Story 15. In 1979, I was forced to resign my commission from the United States Air Force as a C-141 pilot because they found out I was gay. Luckily, I had a great attorney and received an honorable discharge. I am now happily retired from Delta and enjoying retirement with my husband of 42 years. Story 16. I was driving cars for a shady dealer under the table while I was laid off from my real job. I got a call that my uncle had attempted suicide and was in a psychiatric ward in a local hospital and wouldn't talk to anybody else but me. I told my boss I had to leave. He said something like, "Your job comes before family. If you leave, don't come back." I left. The next morning he called and asked me why I wasn't at work. I hung up on him. Story 17. I got fired from a grocery store for being too enthusiastic. They said they didn't think it was a good fit, that maybe I should be a camp counselor. Joke's on them, I did go on to become a camp counselor and I loved it. Story 18. Getting to work 6 minutes late. There was an accident on the freeway and they said that was not a valid excuse. I happily signed the paperwork and walked out with a smile. The manager asked why I was not upset. And all I said was, "Why should I be? You're losing your best asset." He laughed and said I was always too confident. The business went bankrupt and shut down just a few months after that. It was a coincidence because I wasn't that good of an employee. Story 19. Returned from vacation to find out I didn't have a job because incompetent, scatterbrain managers thought I wasn't coming in because I had quit. They realized their mistake and apologized and then were just like, "Well, we've already replaced you. Sorry." Story 20. High school history teacher with a Bachelor of Arts in History, Master of Education in History, and an Education Specialist degree in Advanced Pedagogy with an endorsement in English for speakers of other languages. 10 years of experience in teaching. They decided not to renew my contract because they wanted to hire a football coach who had no experience teaching. Story 21. Back when I was in my teens, I got a job working for a supermarket in their bakery department. I was going on break and decided to get myself a treat and asked the manager to ring me up. And he said, "It's on me. Don't worry about it." I said cool and went upstairs to the McDonald's area to enjoy my strawberry cheesecake ice cream in a cup with a sugar cone on top. After my break, I went back downstairs where the head manager was waiting for me and said I was fired for stealing ice cream. I tried to explain my side of the story, but she wouldn't listen. I was fired for ice cream because my manager told me that I didn't have to pay, even though I had every intention of paying. To this day, I believe there was a conspiracy to get me out and that I was set up by Heather and her cronies. Never trust any coworker or manager, and always pay for ice cream. Story 22. Remember when Dwayne Wade won the finals against the Mavericks way back in the day single-handedly? Yes, I was watching in the men's room the whole game. And yes, I got fired. Worth it. Story 23. I was too eager to prove myself. I'm a classically trained woodworker. I did 3 years of shop class in high school and a full year of college after that. I worked as a custom woodworker for a year and a custom cabinet maker for 3. And they wanted me to wait so they could train me how to laminate boards together. They didn't even need to be flush as they flattened them on a computer numerical control machine afterwards. Story 24. Hired to work on water pumps with no prior experience. I worked on pumps, welded frames for solar panels, and made systems for them. I laid pipes and installed sprinkler systems, installed pool systems, learned to use a forklift, and sold plumbing supplies from the shop. I got fired for not knowing why the solenoid was not working. I spent half a day trying to fix it and then replaced it. Story 25. I worked at Old Navy for maybe 3 months back in 2009. I was fired because I didn't show up for work one time. I literally could not leave the house. We had a major ice storm, and I lived on a dead-end dirt road in the middle of the woods. A large tree had fallen across the road, and we were always one of the last roads in town to get cleared anyway. I explained this to my manager. She accused me of lying and told me not to come back in. Story 26. Oh, I'll never forget this. I used to work at a restaurant and came back during college in the summer to make some extra money. I was surprised to see some new faces, but that's the industry for you. There was a new interim manager filling in while the old manager was off training and running food service expo shows. She had apparently set aside some ice cream for herself in the freezer and pulled me into the office to ask why I ate it. I obviously didn't have any idea what she was talking about and told her, so she fired me for insubordination or some such nonsense. It was probably my third day back. I think I was 18 at the time. Still can't tell if she felt threatened by me or what. Either way, forget that place and forget that lady.